The rain hammered Parish hollow like it had a personal grudge against the town. I sat in my truck outside the old Marriott, watching water cascade down the windshield, thinking about how 3 days at an electrical contractors conference could feel like 3 years. My phone buzzed with a text from Beth. "Don't worry, I'm not bored, especially since I'm not alone." Nice. Real nice. I'd been married to Beth Parish for 16 years, and I knew that tone. It was the same voice she used when she bought expensive shoes and hid the receipts, or when she forgot to mention her mother was coming for the weekend. But this felt different, sharper. The drive home through Parish Hollow's crumbling streets gave me time to think. Main Street looked like a movie set for a Depression-era film, half the storefronts boarded up, the other half hanging on by sheer stubbornness. The old electric company headquarters, where I'd started as an apprentice 20 years ago, stood empty, windows dark as coffin lids. Our house sat on Maple Street, a modest 2-story that I'd been renovating for the past year. Beth had been complaining about the mess, the noise, the inconvenience. "James, when are you going to finish this project?" she'd ask, like I was some weekend warrior instead of a guy who'd built his own electrical contracting business from nothing. I pulled into the driveway and noticed something odd. The living room lights were on, but Beth's car wasn't there. Her text said she wasn't alone, but where was her companion? I grabbed my bag and headed for the front door, keys jingling in the October air. The house felt wrong the moment I stepped inside. Not empty wrong, but occupied wrong. Like someone had been rearranging the furniture in my absence, which, as it turned out, they had. Half our stuff was gone. The coffee table Beth had insisted we buy from that overpriced furniture store downtown. Gone. The matching lamps that cost more than my first truck. Gone. Even the throw pillows that served no purpose except to annoy me when I wanted to sit down. Gone. "Beth?" I called out, but got no answer except the echo of my own voice bouncing off increasingly bare walls. That's when I remembered the security cameras. I'd installed them 6 months ago after a rash of break-ins in the neighborhood. Beth had complained about the expense, but I'd insisted. "You can never be too careful," I'd told her. Now I was about to find out just how right I was. I pulled out my phone and opened the app. The cameras stored footage for 30 days, and I had a sinking feeling I was about to get an education in exactly what my wife meant by not alone. The first camera showed the living room. I scrolled back to yesterday afternoon, fast-forwarding through empty frames until movement caught my eye. There was Beth, but she wasn't alone. She was with a man I recognized all too well, my brother Nick. They were laughing about something, heads close together like conspirators. Nick had his arm around her shoulders, and Beth was looking up at him with an expression I hadn't seen directed at me in years. They moved to the couch, my couch, and what happened next made me want to throw my phone against the wall. Instead, I kept watching. Nick was 6 years younger than me, built like he lived in the gym, which he pretty much did. He'd always been the golden boy in our family, the one who could charm his way out of trouble while I worked my tail off for everything I got. Apparently, he'd charmed his way right into my wife's pants. I switched to the kitchen camera, then the hallway. The story played out like a bad movie across multiple screens. They'd been here for hours, going through my house like they owned it, packing up Beth's things, laughing and carrying on like this was some kind of celebration. At one point, I watched Nick hold up one of my old work shirts and make some joke that sent Beth into fits of giggles. She grabbed the shirt and tossed it in a trash bag with theatrical disgust. "Nice to see someone's enjoying my Netflix account," I muttered to the empty room. The final camera angle showed them loading boxes into Nick's flashy red Camaro. Beth kept looking back at the house with this expression, not guilt, not sadness, but something that looked almost like relief, like she was escaping from prison. I sat there in my half-empty living room, rain still pounding the windows, and felt something shift inside me. Not heartbreak. I'd seen that coming for months, Not even anger, exactly. It was something colder, more calculating. They thought they were clever. They thought they'd pulled one over on stupid old James, the guy who worked with his hands and never saw it coming. They probably figured I'd roll over, sign whatever papers they put in front of me, and slink away with my tail between my legs. They figured wrong. I scrolled through my contacts and found Carl Brennan, the lawyer who'd handled the paperwork when I incorporated my business. It was late, but Carl owed me a favor. I'd rewired his entire office for half price when he was starting out. "James? What's going on?" Carl's voice was thick with sleep. "I need some legal advice, and I need it fast. How quickly can you freeze joint accounts?" "Depends. What's the situation?" "My wife's cleaning out our house with my brother's help. I've got video evidence of them together, and I'm pretty sure they're planning to take me to the cleaners." Carl was quiet for a moment. "How good is this video evidence?" "High definition, multiple angles, time-stamped, the whole 9 yards. I can have paperwork filed first thing in the morning. In the meantime, document everything. Don't confront them directly, and don't do anything that could be construed as threatening." "What about changing the locks?" "It's your house, right? Your name on the deed?" "Both our names, but I put down the down payment and I've been making the mortgage payments." "Then you've got rights. Change the locks, but be prepared for drama." After I hung up, I sat in the growing darkness and planned my next move. Beth and Nick thought they were playing chess while I was stuck playing checkers. Time to show them that the quiet guy who fixed their electrical problems had learned a thing or two about strategy over the years. I grabbed my toolbox and headed for the door locks. If they wanted to play games, I'd give them a game they'd never forget. The rain kept falling, but I was starting to think it sounded less like mourning and more like applause. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The next morning brought the kind of gray October sky that made Parish Hollow look like the end of the world. I was up at 5:30, same as always, drinking coffee in my kitchen and watching the security cameras like they were my personal soap opera. Beth showed up at 7:15, Nick's Camaro purring behind her Honda like a faithful dog. I watched them approach the front door, Beth fumbling with her keys while Nick stood behind her, hands shoved in his jacket pockets. The key didn't work, of course. Through the camera's audio, I could hear Beth's frustrated curse, then Nick's helpful suggestion that maybe she'd grabbed the wrong keys. They tried the back door next, with the same result. My phone rang. "James, what the hell did you do to the locks?" Beth's voice had that sharp edge it got when she was gearing up for a fight. "Good morning to you too, sweetheart. I changed them. Seemed like the prudent thing to do, what with people coming and going while I was away." Silence on the other end, then whispered conversation I couldn't quite make out. "I need to get my things." "I'm sure you do. We should probably sit down and talk about that. You know, like married people." "Don't be a jerk about this, James." "Me? A jerk? I'm just a simple electrician trying to understand why my wife and my brother were redecorating my house while I was at a work conference. Maybe you could explain it to me." Another pause. "We need to talk." "We certainly do, but not with him standing there. This is between you and me." I watched Nick lean in close to Beth, probably offering to handle the situation with his usual combination of charm and muscle. But Beth shook her head and walked back to her car. "I'll call you later," she said, and hung up. They drove away, but I knew they'd be back. In the meantime, I had work to do. My first stop was the bank. Carol Henderson had been handling my business accounts for 10 years, and she greeted me with her usual professional smile. "What can I do for you today, James?" "I need to make some changes to my joint accounts. My lawyer's sending over some paperwork, but I wanted to give you a heads up." Carol's expression shifted slightly. She'd been through enough divorces in a small town to recognize the signs. "I see. Well, We'll need to follow proper procedures, of course. Of course. I'm not trying to hide anything. I just want to make sure nobody can clean out our savings while we work things out. That's perfectly reasonable. By 9 o'clock, I'd secured the accounts and canceled the credit cards that Beth had been using to fund her new lifestyle. It wasn't vindictive, it was practical. If she wanted to leave, she could leave with what she'd brought to the marriage. My next stop was Parish Electric, the business I'd built from nothing over the past 12 years. My office was in a converted garage behind my house, but I'd been thinking about moving to a real commercial space. Today seemed like a good day to make that happen. I called Tom Morrison, who owned a small office building on the edge of town. Tom had been after me for months to rent space from him, and I'd been putting him off because Beth thought it was an unnecessary expense. "James, good to hear from you. Ready to join the big leagues?" "Maybe. You still got that space available?" "For you?" "Absolutely. When do you want to take a look?" "How about this afternoon?" While I was arranging my business affairs, Beth was apparently arranging hers. My phone buzzed with a text from my daughter Becca. "Dad, what did you do? Mom's crying and Uncle Nick is really mad." Becca was 15, old enough to understand that her parents' marriage was falling apart, but young enough to think it was somehow my fault. I couldn't blame her. Beth had always been good at playing the victim. I texted back, "Just protecting our family's interests. Nothing for you to worry about." "Can I come stay with you?" That surprised me. Becca had been pulling away from me for months, spending more time with her mother and Nick, treating me like an embarrassing relative at family gatherings. "Of course. You're always welcome here. Mom says you changed the locks." "I did. I'll give you a key." "Why did you change them?" That was a harder question. How do you explain to your teenage daughter that her mother and uncle had been using the house like a hotel while you were away? How do you tell her that the adults she trusted had been lying to everyone, including her? "Sometimes you have to protect what matters to you," I texted back. "I don't understand." "You will." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of phone calls and paperwork. Carl had been busy, filing motions and sending letters that would make Beth's life considerably more complicated. I wasn't trying to destroy her. I was just leveling the playing field. At lunchtime, I drove to Jack's Bar and Grill, the kind of place where Parish Hollow's working class gathered to complain about their lives over cheap beer and decent burgers. Jack Riley had owned the place for 20 years, and he'd been my boxing coach back when I thought I might make something of myself in the ring. "Jimmy Parish," Jack called out as I walked in. "Haven't seen you in a while." "Been busy, Jack. You know how it is." "I heard. Small town, big ears. You want to talk about it?" Jack was one of the few people in Parish Hollow who'd known me since before I was married, before I became half of James and Beth Parish. He remembered when I was just Jimmy, the kid who worked harder than anyone else and never complained about getting knocked down. "Not much to talk about. My wife's moving out and she's taking my brother with her." Jack poured me a beer without being asked. "That's rough, Jimmy, but maybe it's not the worst thing that could happen." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe it's time you remembered who you were before you became who she wanted you to be." I thought about that while I ate my burger and watched the lunch crowd. These were my people, electricians and plumbers and construction workers who got up early and worked hard and didn't apologize for who they were. Somewhere along the way, I'd started apologizing for being one of them. Beth had always been embarrassed by what I did for a living. She'd introduce me at parties as James, who owns his own business, never mentioning that the business involved crawling through attics and getting my hands dirty. She wanted me to be something I wasn't, and I'd spent years trying to accommodate her. Well, those days were over. I was finishing my beer when my phone rang. Beth again. "We need to meet," she said without preamble. "I'm listening." "Not on the phone, somewhere public. The diner on Main Street, 1 hour. "Fine. And James? Bring a key." I hung up and looked at Jack, who'd been listening with the practiced discretion of a career bartender. You ready for this? He asked. I've been ready for a long time. I just didn't know it. The diner was nearly empty when I arrived, just a few old-timers nursing coffee and reading newspapers. Beth was already there, sitting in a corner booth with her back to the wall like she was expecting trouble. She looked good. She always looked good. Beth had the kind of beauty that required maintenance, and she'd been maintaining it religiously for 40 years. Her blonde hair was perfect, her makeup flawless, her clothes expensive but tasteful. She also looked scared. "Thank you for coming," she said, as I slid into the booth across from her. "Wouldn't miss it. How's Nick doing? I heard he was upset about something." Beth's jaw tightened. "Leave Nick out of this." "Kinda hard to do, considering he's been helping himself to my house and my wife." "It's not what you think." "Really? What is it then? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like my wife and my brother have been carrying on behind my back and cleaning out our house while I was working." Beth stared at her coffee cup. "Things between us haven't been good for a long time, James. You know that." "So you decided to fix them by hooking up with Nick?" "I decided to find someone who actually cared about me. Someone who didn't treat me like a piece of furniture." That stung, mostly because there was some truth to it. I had been taking Beth for granted, assuming she'd always be there while I focused on building my business and providing for our family. But that didn't excuse what she'd done. "So what's the plan?" I asked. "You and Nick ride off into the sunset together?" "I want a divorce, a fair divorce. We split everything 50-50 and go our separate ways." "Define fair." "The house, the business, the savings accounts. Half of everything." I laughed, and Beth's face flushed with anger. "What's so funny? You think you're entitled to half my business? The business I built while you were shopping and having lunch with your friends? I supported you. I took care of the house and raised our daughters while you worked. And I paid for everything. The house, the cars, the credit cards you maxed out on clothes and furniture and God knows what else." Beth leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, James. I'm trying to be reasonable here." "Reasonable? You want reasonable? Here's reasonable. You can have whatever you brought to this marriage, plus whatever the court says you're entitled to. But you're not getting half my business, and you're not getting the house. We'll see about that." She stood up to leave, then turned back. "The key, James." I pulled a house key from my pocket and slid it across the table. Beth picked it up and headed for the door. "Tell Nick I said hello," I called after her. She didn't look back. I sat in the diner for another hour, drinking coffee and thinking about what came next. Beth thought she held all the cards, but she was wrong. She had Nick, and she had whatever story she'd been telling herself about why this was all my fault. But I had something better. I had nothing left to lose. The next few days passed in a strange kind of limbo. Beth moved in with Nick, who lived in a gaudy McMansion on the other side of town, the kind of place that screamed, "I have money, but no taste." Meanwhile, I settled into my newly empty house and tried to figure out my next move. The girls were staying with Beth during the week and coming to me on weekends, which gave me plenty of time to plan. Becca was still confused about the whole situation, but Riley, my 13-year-old, seemed to understand that something fundamental had shifted in our family dynamic. "Dad, are you and Mom getting divorced?" she asked on Friday night as we ate pizza and watched a movie. "Probably, sweetheart. I'm sorry." "It's okay. I kind of figured." Riley had always been the perceptive one, the kid who noticed when adults were pretending everything was fine. She'd probably seen this coming long before I did. "Are you mad at Mom?" That was a loaded question. Was I mad? Disappointed? Hurt? All of the above? "I'm working through some feelings," I said finally. "But whatever happens between your mother and me, it doesn't change how we feel about you and Becca." "I know, but Uncle Nick is weird." "Weird how?" "He's always trying too hard, you know, like he's performing or something." "Smart kid." Monday morning brought my first real test. I was at the new office space signing the lease with Tom Morrison when my phone started buzzing with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them until Carl called. "James, we might have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "Beth filed a restraining order. She's claiming you threatened her." "That's ridiculous. When did I supposedly threaten her?" "According to her statement, you made threatening remarks during your meeting at the diner." I thought back to our conversation. Had I threatened her? Not directly, but I could see how my comment about having nothing left to lose might be interpreted that way. "What does this mean?" "It means you need to stay away from her and Nick until we can get this sorted out. No contact except through lawyers." "What about the girls?" "The order doesn't mention them, so you should be okay there. But James, be careful. Don't give her any ammunition." After I hung up, I sat in my new office and tried to process what had just happened. Beth was playing hardball, using the legal system to paint me as the dangerous ex-husband. It was a smart move, actually. If she could make me look like the aggressor, it would strengthen her position in divorce proceedings. But two could play that game. I spent the rest of the day going through the security footage from the past month, documenting every time Beth and Nick had been at the house. I also pulled financial records showing the money Beth had been spending, money that was supposed to be going toward household expenses, but had instead been funding her new wardrobe and expensive dinners out. By Wednesday, the story had made its way around Parish Hollow's gossip network. Small towns are like that. Everyone knows everyone else's business, and they're not shy about sharing their opinions. I was grabbing lunch at the hardware store when Mrs. Callahan, our nosy neighbor, cornered me by the paint display. "James, dear, I'm so sorry to hear about your troubles." Mrs. Callahan was 85 years old and had been monitoring neighborhood drama since the Eisenhower administration. Nothing happened on Maple Street without her knowledge and commentary. "Thank you, Mrs. Callahan. I appreciate your concern. That brother of yours always seemed a little too friendly, if you ask me. I saw him coming and going at all hours while you were working." "Did you really?" "Oh, yes. And not just recently, either. This has been going on for months." That was news to me. I'd assumed the affair was relatively recent, but if Mrs. Callahan was right, Beth and Nick had been carrying on for most of the summer. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but did you ever mention this to anyone?" Mrs. Callahan looked offended. "Of course not. It's not my place to interfere in other people's marriages." "Right. The woman who called the police when teenagers walked too loudly past her house suddenly developed discretion when it came to adultery." "Well, I appreciate you telling me now. You're a good man, James. You deserve better." I was starting to think she might be right. That evening, I was working late at the office when Becca called. "Dad, can you come pick me up?" "What's wrong?" "I got in a fight with Mom. She's being crazy." "What happened?" "She found out I was texting you, and she freaked out. She said I was taking your side and being disloyal to the family." The family. Like she and Nick were the family now, and I was some kind of outsider. "Where are you?" "At the McDonald's on Route 9. I walked here from Uncle Nick's house." I was there in 15 minutes. Becca was sitting in a corner booth, looking younger than her 15 years and fighting back tears. "Hey, kiddo, rough night?" "Mom's acting like you're some kind of criminal. She keeps talking about how you threatened her and how she's afraid of what you might do." "I never threatened your mother, Becca. We had a disagreement, but I never threatened her." "I know. That's what I told her. But she wouldn't listen." We drove home in relative silence, Becca staring out the window at the familiar streets of Parish Hollow. Finally, she spoke up. "Dad, why didn't you fight for her?" "What do you mean?" "When you found out about Uncle Nick, why didn't you try to win her back?" It was a fair question, and I wasn't sure I had a good answer. Sometimes, sweetheart, when someone shows you who they really are, you have to believe them. Your mother made her choice. But you still love her, right? Did I? That was getting harder to answer every day. I love the person I thought she was. I'm not sure that person ever really existed. The next morning brought another surprise. I was checking my email when I found a message from Monica Garrett, Beth's best friend and the unofficial queen bee of Parish Hollow's social scene. James, we need to talk. There are things about this situation you don't understand. Meet me at the coffee shop on Main Street at 2 p.m. if you want answers. Monica was a piece of work, a 41-year-old HR manager who treated small-town politics like a ruthless contest. She'd never liked me, probably because I couldn't be bothered to play her games or pretend to care about her opinions. But if she had information about Beth and Nick, I needed to hear it. The coffee shop was busy with the usual afternoon crowd of retirees and stay-at-home moms. Monica was already there, sitting at a table in the back corner with a clear view of the door. "Thank you for coming," she said, as I sat down. "What do you want, Monica?" "I want to help you understand what's really happening here." "I think I understand just fine. My wife is sleeping with my brother, and you're probably helping her plan the divorce strategy." Monica smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. "You always were too simple for your own good, James. You think this is about Beth falling for Nick's charm? Isn't it? This is about you, James. This is about what you did." "What I did?" 5 years ago, the Henderson Project. Ring any bells? The Henderson Project. I remembered it well, a big electrical job at the new shopping center that Monica's then-boyfriend had been angling to get. He'd submitted a bid that was way too high and got angry when I underbid him and won the contract. "What does that have to do with anything?" "You cost Derek his business. He had to leave town, and we broke up because of it." Derek Morrison, not related to Tom, despite the name. He'd been a decent electrician, but a terrible businessman, and his bid had been inflated by at least 30%. I'd submitted a fair bid and done good work. Derek priced himself out of the market. That's not my fault. You destroyed his life, and now I'm returning the favor. The pieces started falling into place. Monica hadn't been helping Beth plan a divorce. She'd been planning the whole thing from the beginning. You set this up. I introduced Beth to some new friends. I helped her see that she deserved better than a husband who worked with his hands and never appreciated what he had. And Nick? Nick was easy. He's always been jealous of you, always felt like he was living in your shadow. All I had to do was convince him that Beth was unhappy and available. I stared at Monica, trying to process what she was telling me. This wasn't about Beth falling out of love with me or Nick's charm. This was about a woman with a grudge who'd spent 5 years planning her revenge. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to know. I want you to understand that you brought this on yourself." Monica stood up, gathering her purse and jacket. "Enjoy the divorce proceedings, James. I think you'll find them very educational." She walked away, leaving me sitting alone with the wreckage of my marriage and the knowledge that I'd been played by an expert. But Monica had made one mistake. She'd underestimated me. I sat in that coffee shop for another hour, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold and thinking about Monica's revelation. 5 years of planning, 5 years of cultivating Beth's dissatisfaction, feeding her resentment, and positioning Nick as the solution to all her problems. It was actually impressive, in a twisted way. But Monica had revealed her hand too early. She'd wanted me to know how clever she was, how thoroughly she'd outmaneuvered me. That kind of pride was a weakness I could exploit. My first call was to Carl. "I need you to dig up everything you can on Monica Garrett. Employment history, financial records, legal troubles, everything." "What am I looking for?" "I don't know yet, but someone who's capable of orchestrating a 5-year revenge plot probably has other skeletons in her closet. This is about more than your divorce, isn't it?" "Much more." My second call was to a private investigator named Tommy Chen, who'd done some work for me a few years back when I'd had problems with employee theft. "Jimmy, how's business?" "Complicated. I need some surveillance work done." "What kind of surveillance?" I need to know where Monica Garrett goes, who she talks to, what she does with her time, but I need it done quietly. How quietly? The kind of quiet that doesn't leave fingerprints. Tommy was expensive, but he was good. If Monica had secrets, he'd find them. That evening, I was cooking dinner for Becca and Riley when my phone rang. It was Beth. We need to talk about the girls. I'm listening. They can't keep staying with you on weekends. It's confusing for them. Confusing how? They're getting mixed messages. You're telling them one thing, I'm telling them another. I'm telling them the truth, Beth. Maybe that's the problem. The truth according to you. The truth according to the security cameras. Silence on the other end, then. You recorded us? I recorded my house. You just happened to be in it. That's invasion of privacy. It's my house. I can record whatever I want in my house. Another pause. The girls are staying with me from now on. If you want to see them, we'll arrange supervised visits. Supervised by who? By the court. She hung up. I looked at Becca and Riley, who'd been listening to my side of the conversation with growing alarm. Dad, what's happening? Riley asked. Your mother's trying to limit my time with you. Can she do that? Becca wanted to know. She can try. But I wasn't going to let it happen without a fight. The next morning, I drove to the courthouse and filed my own motions for joint custody, for a fair division of assets, and for a full accounting of how our money had been spent over the past year. If Beth wanted to play legal games, I'd show her how the game was really played. I also stopped by the high school to talk to the girls' counselor, Mrs. Patterson. Mr. Parish, I'm glad you came in. Becca's been having some difficulties lately. What kind of difficulties? She's been acting out in class, getting into arguments with other students. She seems very angry. She's dealing with a lot right now. I understand. Divorce is hard on children, but there's something else you should know. Mrs. Patterson pulled out a folder and opened it. Becca's been posting some concerning things on social media, complaints about you, accusations, things that seem designed to embarrass you publicly. She showed me printouts of Instagram posts and TikTok videos. Becca had been sharing details about our family situation, painting me as the villain who'd driven her mother away. The posts had dozens of comments, mostly from other teenagers offering support and sympathy. When did this start? About a week ago, right after the news about your separation became public. A week ago, right around the time Monica had revealed her involvement in the whole mess. Mrs. Patterson, do you think Becca is doing this on her own? What do you mean? I mean, do you think someone might be encouraging her to post these things? Mrs. Patterson considered the question. It's possible. The language in some of these posts seems more sophisticated than what I'd expect from a 15-year-old. I thanked her and left, but my mind was racing. Monica wasn't content to destroy my marriage. She was going after my relationship with my daughters, too. That afternoon, I met Tommy Chen at a diner outside of town. What did you find? Tommy slid a manila envelope across the table. Monica Garrett's got some interesting hobbies. I opened the envelope and found photographs of Monica meeting with various people around Parish Hollow, including several members of the school board and the town council. What's she up to? Near as I can tell, she's building a coalition, spreading stories about you, painting you as unstable and potentially dangerous. Based on what? Based on whatever she thinks will stick. The restraining order was just the beginning. Tommy pulled out another set of photos showing Monica at Beth's workplace, talking to her supervisor. She's also been working on getting Beth sympathy at work. Poor abandoned wife, dangerous husband, needs all the support she can get. What about her background? That's where it gets interesting. Monica's got a history of this kind of thing. Tommy showed me documents from Monica's previous jobs, a pattern of workplace conflicts, harassment complaints, and sudden resignations. She was fired from her last job for creating a hostile work environment. Seems she had a grudge against a coworker and made the woman's life miserable until she quit. Why wasn't this public knowledge? Settlement agreements, non-disclosure clauses. The companies paid her to go away quietly. I studied the photographs and documents, seeing Monica's campaign against me with new clarity. She was methodical, patient, and utterly ruthless. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated how far I was willing to go to protect my family. That evening, I called Jack and asked him to meet me at the bar. "You look like hell, Jimmy." "I feel worse than I look." I told him about Monica's confession, about her 5-year plan, about the social media campaign against me. Jack listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or shaking his head. "So what are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to fight back." "How?" "By giving Monica exactly what she's been asking for." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Meaning? She wants to paint me as the dangerous ex-husband? Fine, I'll be dangerous. Jimmy, be careful. Don't do anything stupid." "I'm not talking about hurting anyone, Jack. I'm talking about playing the game better than she does." I spent the weekend planning my counterattack. Monica had been operating in the shadows, manipulating people and situations while keeping her own hands clean. But shadows work both ways. Monday morning, I put the first phase of my plan into motion. I started with social media. I created accounts on all the platforms Becca had been using and began sharing my own version of events. Not angry rants or bitter accusations, but calm, factual posts about what had really happened to my marriage. I shared the timeline of Beth and Nick's affair, backed up with documentation. I posted about the money that had been spent without my knowledge, the lies that had been told, the manipulation that had been going on behind the scenes. Most importantly, I shared Monica's role in orchestrating the whole thing. Within hours, the posts were being shared and commented on throughout Parish Hollow's social networks. The narrative that Monica had been carefully crafting began to crumble as people saw the evidence for themselves. But that was just the beginning. Phase 2 involved the private investigators' findings about Monica's employment history. I had copies made of all the relevant documents and sent them anonymously to her current employer, along with a note suggesting they might want to review their harassment policies. Phase 3 was more personal. I knew Monica's weakness. She needed to be seen as the moral authority, the person who knew what was best for everyone. Her reputation was everything to her. So I decided to destroy it. I started small, sharing information about Monica's past conflicts with neighbors and co-workers. I let people know about the pattern of grudges and revenge plots that had followed her from job to job. Then I escalated. I arranged for Monica to receive copies of all the evidence I'd gathered about her campaign against me, along with a note, "Two can play this game." By Wednesday, Monica was getting calls from her employer about the anonymous complaints. By Thursday, her neighbors were looking at her differently. By Friday, she was persona non grata at the coffee shop, where she'd held court for years. But Monica wasn't finished yet. Neither was I. Saturday morning brought the kind of autumn weather that made Parish Hollow almost beautiful. Crisp air, bright sunshine, leaves turning gold and red on the maple trees. It would have been a perfect day for working in the yard or taking the girls somewhere fun. Instead, I was preparing for war. Monica had responded to my counterattack by escalating her own campaign. She'd convinced Beth to file additional complaints with the police, claiming I was stalking her and making threatening phone calls. She'd also reached out to my business clients, spreading rumors about my stability and reliability. 2 of my biggest contracts had been canceled in the past week, but Monica's biggest mistake was involving my daughters in her schemes. The social media posts that had seemed too sophisticated for Becca were definitely Monica's work. I'd found evidence that she'd been coaching my daughter on what to write and when to post it. That crossed a line I couldn't ignore. I was sitting in my office, going through Tommy Chen's latest surveillance report, when Carl called. "We've got a problem, James." "What now?" "Beth's lawyer is pushing for an emergency hearing. They want to suspend your visitation rights entirely." "On what grounds?" They're claiming you've been harassing Monica Garrett and using the children as weapons in your divorce. That's ridiculous. Maybe, but they've got documentation, screenshots of your social media posts, witness statements, the whole 9 yards. When's the hearing? Monday morning, Judge Morrison. Judge Morrison, Tom's uncle, the man who'd rented me my new office space. That could work in my favor, or it could backfire spectacularly. Carl, I need you to prepare a countersuit. Against Beth? Against Monica? Harassment, interference with family relationships, conspiracy, whatever charges you can make stick. That's a risky move, James. It could make you look vindictive. I am vindictive. The question is whether I'm also right. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and considered my options. I could back down, let Monica win, and hope for the best in divorce proceedings. Or I could double down and risk everything on one final gambit. The choice was easier than it should have been. Sunday evening, I drove to Nick's house. The McMansion sat on 2 acres of perfectly manicured lawn, all glass and stone and architectural pretension. Nick's red Camaro was in the driveway, along with Beth's Honda and Monica's BMW. Perfect. They were all there. I parked across the street and pulled out my phone. Tommy Chen had installed some very sophisticated surveillance equipment in my truck, the kind that could record conversations through windows from a considerable distance. I didn't have to wait long. Through the living room window, I could see all 3 of them gathered around Nick's oversized dining table, papers spread out in front of them. Monica was clearly in charge, pointing at documents and gesturing emphatically, while Beth and Nick nodded along. The audio pickup was crystal clear. The key is to make him look unstable, Monica was saying. Dangerous. The judge needs to see him as a threat to the children. But what if he fights back? Beth asked. What if he shows them the security footage? The footage doesn't matter. We control the narrative now. He's the angry ex-husband who can't accept that his wife has moved on. What about the social media stuff? Nick wanted to know. People are starting to ask questions. Let them ask. By the time this is over, James Parish will be a pariah in this town. No one will want to work with him. No one will want to associate with him. And then what? Beth asked. And then you get everything. The house, the business, full custody of the girls. James gets nothing. I recorded 20 minutes of conversation, documenting Monica's strategy and Beth's willing participation. They were planning to destroy me completely, not just win the divorce, but they'd made one crucial error. They'd assumed I was fighting alone. Monday morning, I arrived at the courthouse with Carl, Tommy Chen, and a briefcase full of evidence. The hearing was scheduled for 9 o'clock, but I could see Beth, Nick, and Monica huddled with their lawyer in the hallway. Monica looked confident, almost smug. She nodded at me as I passed, like she was acknowledging a defeated opponent. Judge Morrison was a stern-faced man in his 60s who'd been handling family court cases for 20 years. He'd seen every variation of marital warfare and had little patience for theatrics. This is an emergency hearing regarding visitation rights in the matter of Parish versus Parish, he began. Mrs. Parish, your attorney may proceed. Beth's lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman named Sandra Klein, stood up and launched into a prepared speech about my allegedly erratic behavior and the danger I posed to the children. She presented the social media posts, the witness statements, and Monica's testimony about my threatening behavior at the coffee shop. It was a compelling performance, and I could see Judge Morrison taking notes. Then it was Carl's turn. Your Honor, my client has been the victim of a carefully orchestrated campaign of harassment and defamation. We have evidence that Mrs. Garrett has been manipulating this situation from the beginning. Carl presented Tommy's surveillance photos, the employment records showing Monica's history of workplace harassment, and the financial documents showing how Beth and Nick had been planning their affair for months. But the real bombshell was the audio recording from Sunday night. Your Honor, this recording was made in a public area outside Mr. Nicholas Parish's residence. As you can hear, Mrs. Garrett explicitly discusses her plan to destroy my client's reputation and relationships. Judge Morrison listened to the entire 20-minute recording without interruption. I watched Monica's face go from confident to concerned to terrified as her own words played back in the courtroom. When it was over, Judge Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "Mrs. Garrett, do you have any response to this recording?" Monica stood up, but no words came out. For the first time since I'd known her, she was speechless. "Mrs. Parish, were you aware of Mrs. Garrett's activities on your behalf?" Beth looked at her lawyer, then at Monica, then back at the judge. We were just trying to protect ourselves." "From what?" "From him," Beth said, pointing at me. "From his anger." Judge Morrison looked at me. "Mr. Parish, do you have anything to add?" I stood up, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The lies, the manipulation, the systematic destruction of my family. "Your Honor, I'm not angry. I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed that my wife chose to end our marriage through deception rather than honesty. I'm disappointed that my brother chose to betray me rather than talk to me. And I'm disappointed that Mrs. Garrett chose to use my children as weapons in her personal vendetta." I paused, looking at Beth and Nick and Monica. "But I'm not dangerous. I'm just a man who worked hard to build a life, and who's trying to salvage what's left of it." Judge Morrison nodded. "Based on the evidence presented today, I'm denying the motion to suspend Mr. Parish's visitation rights. Furthermore, I'm ordering Mrs. Garrett to cease all contact with the minor children and to refrain from any further interference in this family's affairs." He looked directly at Monica. "Mrs. Garrett, if I see you in my courtroom again, in connection with this case, you will face contempt charges." Monica's face was white with rage, but she said nothing. "This hearing is adjourned." As people filed out of the courtroom, Monica brushed past me, leaning close enough to whisper, "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," I replied, and for the first time in months, I actually believed it. Outside the courthouse, Beth approached me while Nick and Monica waited by their cars. "James, Save it, Beth. We'll work out the details through our lawyers. I never meant for it to go this far." "Yes, you did. You just didn't expect to get caught." Beth looked like she wanted to say more, but Nick called her name and she walked away. I stood on the courthouse steps, watching my wife and brother drive away with the woman who'd orchestrated the destruction of my marriage. In a few months, the divorce would be final. Beth would get her freedom, Nick would get his prize, and Monica would get her revenge. But I would get something too. I would get my life back. The sun was shining on Parish Hollow, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. There would be more battles ahead, custody arrangements, property division, the slow work of rebuilding my reputation and my business. But the war was over, and I had won.